welcome back to QubaHQ tutorials. I'm Kuba Michalski and I managed to scrap away a little bit of free time to record this new exciting tutorial for you guys. You might have noticed that I'm quite behind on my promise of the 4 new tutorials in June. That's because the past 6 weeks have been absolutely insane for me. I have completed a total of 6 new commercials, working weekdays and weekends without a single hour to spare. I have also made a promise that I will not touch StarCraft 2 until I release something new on the site, and I'm really itching to play that game at least a little bit, so here we go, this is the new tutorial. Today we'll be creating a texture-driven animated wall of lights, which can be used to either create cool light displays or to drive particle effects that are emitted from lights. The project is a kind of hybrid between the recent tutorial on animated light rig and a bit earlier one in which we were creating an LED vignette display. I hope the preview has sharpened your appetite. Let's begin. So let's start by creating a new composition. I'll be using a PAL-DV widescreen square pixel for this one. Call it main, and I'm setting it at 15 seconds. We'll probably trim it down to much shorter time later on, but it's good to have some extra for now. And of course, let's switch our color depth to 16 bits per channel so that all the gradients and lights look a little bit better than in 8-bit. The first thing I'm gonna put in it is the floor and the camera, so we have some reference points to what we're doing. So let's create a new solid, call it floor, and I'm going to set it at a fairly dark gray color. I'm using this particular color because I'll be having a lot of lights in the scene and we don't want it to blow too bright. The width and height can be set at 500 pixels, making it a nice little square. Now let's turn it into 3D layer, move it to the origin point of 0, 0, 0. Now this is not typical for After Effects, but for those of you who are using Cinema 4D, I'm going to show you a neat little trick, and it really helps to center your 3D world around the 0 point when you're using 3D software in conjunction with After Effects. Next, let's put a new camera in, and I want to use something with fairly wide angle, so 20mm should be fine. Click OK, and of course it's pointing at our typical point of origin in After Effects, so we have to move it around. So I'm gonna get the point of interest and position, 0 all the values at point of interest, and 0 the first 2 values at the position. So this way we're looking straight at the 0, 0, 0 point, being away from it by 500, almost 600 pixels. Now another thing we should do is rotate the floor to become a floor rather than a wall. So you can see that our wide angle is really kicking in here. We have some nice perspective distortion. Let's set it at -90, bring the camera up a little bit, maybe just horizontally. Let's say we're gonna look at 100 pixels taller, and then scale the floor way up so that when we introduce the lights we'll not see the edges. So I think 10,000% should be fine enough. It goes away to the horizon. We can also move it a little bit in a Z-space, let's say by 10,000 pixels. That should be fine. Let's see if we're seeing the bottom of it. No. Alright, now to create the light rig. So creating this wall of lights can be quite tedious in After Effects. That's why I'm going to show you how to do it in 3D a bit later on. But for those of you who don't use any 3D package, here's how it's done. I'm gonna create a new light, set it to point light. Let's adjust it to be white. Light 1, maybe instead of light 1 I'll call it A. Light 1, and that's going to help us once we're adding the flares to separate different lights. And of course everything disappears because the light is somewhere else and our plane is not illuminated properly. So let's move it to the origin point 0, 0, 0. Move it a little bit up. You can see that it's starting to light up our scene. I would put it at -100 so that we have a nice, easy to remember number, and then push it back by, let's say, 500 pixels. So it went a little bit deeper in the scene. I'm going to now create a new null object, again position it at 3D coordinates of 0, 0, 0, and parent our light to this object. Now I'll want to create a grid of light, 10 lights across and 8 lights tall. So we're gonna be doing a lot of copy pasting in here. So we have our first light. Actually I parented it, but I shouldn't have. I'm gonna duplicate it immediately, move it underneath. This is important that we keep the numbers going down. Unparent the first one and rotate our null in the y-axis by, let's say, 5 degrees. Now 5 degrees looks a little bit too less, let's do 10. This looks like a fine distance, and basically this will be a rinse and repeat procedure. Let's try to do it as fast as possible. So duplicate it, move it below, unparent the top one, turn it by another 10 degrees, duplicate, move, unparent, 10 degrees, duplicate, this is gonna take a while, unparent, 10 degrees, duplicate, move below. Actually, right now we can speed things up. Let's unparent all of those, move this back to 0, duplicate all 5 of them. Now, this is a cool trick that I'm going to show you. You can see that our numbering is kind of weird right now. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 going downwards, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 going upwards. What I'm gonna do is, with Shift, I'm going to select the layers in the correct order. So 6, 7, whoops, not with Shift, sorry, with Control. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Cut them using Control X, and then paste them. And since I selected them from bottom to the top, when I paste them, their order is reversed. So right now we have properly ordered 10 lights. Now let's parent them back to the null and just turn them all together by 50 degrees. And this way we have all 10 of them. Let's parent all of them back to our null and turn it back until they're centered on the screen. That looks pretty fine. We can right now move them up because this is our top row and we'll want to have several rows underneath. So let's move them up a little bit by offsetting the Y position a little bit up. And you can see that they create a pretty nice curve in there. Let's move it by what? Let's say -300. Let's hope that works. And again, we select all of them, copy them, paste them underneath, and yet again I copied them incorrectly, so from bottom to top, cut, paste. The order is correct right now. We unparent the other ones and move our null down. Let's see how much do we need to move it. Whoops, I think I unparented all of them. Let's select these guys, move them down, and you can probably feel at this point already that your After Effects is slowing down significantly. Now, if you're using a cool graphics card like NVIDIA Quadro, your performance shouldn't take any hits, but if you're running on off-the-shelf card, I'm using 8800 GTS, which is pretty much a gaming video card. Rendering this many lights in After Effects is going to slow you down. What I'm gonna do is turn off this floor so the After Effects doesn't have to calculate all the lights around, and continue. So we have all these lights. We can perhaps recolor it a little bit to see groups a bit better. And again, from top to bottom, copy paste. The order always changes, that's really irritating. Cut, paste, move them underneath, parent these guys to the null. Where is it? Null here. Unparent these guys and move it another 50 pixels down, so -200. I don't think there is a point really in wasting your time in here doing it, but all you have to do is repeat this procedure until you're going to have 8 rows, 10 lights each. This is a really slow procedure, as I told you, so what I'm gonna do right now is I'm going to take our null, take all our lights and delete them and jump to Cinema 4D and show you how to do this in a much quicker and much more versatile process. So here we are in Cinema 4D, and before we do anything else, let's set up our project properties correctly so that they match our After Effects settings. So I'm gonna go on the render settings, go to output panel and set our resolution. Now Cinema 4D comes with tons of presets, so if I go to film and video, I have pretty much all the same settings as After Effects. So I'm choosing PAL DV widescreen square pixel, and this way my screen will match After Effects. Looking at the order of the axis, we have the blue Z axis pointing towards right now. Let's turn it around so that we match After Effects coordinates. So we have X horizontally, Y vertically, and Z being the depth. Let's create a new plane and set it to be divided horizontally, so width segments, into 10. And height segments we're setting at 8. So this is exactly the grid we want to have. And also right now, if you look at it, cells are not equal, and that's because the entire size of the plane is square and we're trying to make something more rectangular. So I'm gonna adjust the size as well. I'm gonna set the width to 1000, so it's 100 times our width segments, and the height to 800. And this way we can see that we have nice square cells. Now I'll need to back up a little bit in here to see everything properly, and also flip this plane to face us properly. So rotation with shift pressed, I'm gonna rotate it by 90 degrees. And you can see right now that our floor is at the same level. Whoops, what happened? Our floor is at the same level with this grid in here, so we need to move our plane a little bit above, so when we're doing the reflections and all that jazz, everything will work fine. I'm hitting S to center our grid, and right now we can use the bend deformer to give it some more interesting shape. So let's select the bend, put it into our plane and adjust the deformation. So I'm gonna set the strength to 15 for now, just to see what's happening. And as we can see, it's bending our box in the wrong direction. So again, we need to rotate the deformer by 90 degrees here, and then 90 degrees this way, and also change its mode into unlimited. And right now you can already see that we're creating a nice curved line that we can very easily adjust into whichever direction we want. Now additionally, we may want to make it look a bit more spherical. So I'm going to add yet another bend deformer simply by copy pasting this one and dropping it inside the plane. And this one I'm going to rotate by 90 degrees along the Z-axis and move it up to approximately the center of our plane. Let's look from the side. That creates a nice cross-section of the sphere. I think the second one is a bit too strong, so I'm gonna lower it to, let's say, just 5 degrees, so that we get just a little bit of deformation along the vertical axis. Okay, so we have our plane. I'm gonna switch the display mode to line shading so we can see the cells properly. And now how do we turn it into light array? This is very simple, provided you have the MoGraph module installed. What I'm gonna do is create a new light, and I'm just gonna make a normal light, not a spotlight. We're gonna deal with that a bit later, but for now we just need a normal light. It is somewhere there behind the plane, but it doesn't really matter to us. Go to MoGraph and choose Cloner Object. Now we're gonna drop our light into the cloner object, so we'll be cloning this light, and adjust the properties for it. So right now the cloner is set to linear, and what it does, it's create. Let's turn off this plane for a second. It's kind of hard to see, but it basically creates several clones of the lights. Yeah, I don't think you can see it with that compression, but you have one light here, another one here, and another one there. So that's the linear mode. What we want to do is we want to switch it to object mode. And when we switch it to object mode, it asks us, what is your object? We're just gonna drag and drop our plane into it. And voila, what you can see right now is we have a light on every vertex of this geometry. Now that creates a bit too many lights because there is more vertices than planes, so we're gonna switch the mode from vertex into polygon center. And once we do that, we have a light in the middle of every polygon. And that means we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 lights horizontally and 8 light vertically. This is pretty much done. All we need to do right now is select the cloner object, and I'm not sure what this button is called. I think it's something like collapse or well, a little button that turns objects into groups. We just click it and that turns our cloner object into a set of lights. Now let's check one thing. Where is light 0? You can see that right now light 0 is at the bottom left corner, and that's not going to work for us. We need this light to be up here, so the horizontal order is fine, but the vertical one is not. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to undo several times before I collapse that transformation, go to my plane, go to its coordinates, and scale it from +1 to -1 along the y-axis. Whoops, not along y-axis apparently. Let's see which axis it is we have to switch. It's the z-axis. So basically I'm doing a flip in here, -1 in the z-axis. So it's the same object, it's perfectly symmetrical, only that it's upside down right now. And when I collapse the cloner object and expand it, I can see that right now my first light is in the top left corner, then the lights continue until 9 in the first row, and then jump to a second row, etc. So this is perfect light array ready for use. I'm going to delete the plane, I don't need it anymore, and export it into After Effects. So for that we need to go to the render settings, go to the Save tab, and unfortunately it won't let us save it until we save the file itself. So let's create a save for the file, call it whatever. So this would be light wall. I have a caps lock pressed. Light wall, and then we can expand the compositing project file, select save, make sure that your target applications is After Effects, you have several options in there, and make sure to click include 3D data. That's going to transfer all the information about those lights into your After Effects. Click on save project file and let's call it light wall again and save. And that's it. We're done with Cinema 4D. We can go back to After Effects now. Alright. So let's right now import the data into After Effects. Now, if you're new to the whole 3D and After Effects integration, you must first install a plugin to allow After Effects to recognize Cinema 4D files. That plugin comes with the Maxon Cinema 4D installation, and you can just consult your user manual to figure out how to install it. It's a pretty simple drag and drop procedure. Now I have the plugin already installed, so in my project window I'm going to double click, navigate through the swamp of different files into our Lightwall AEC file that we just exported and open it. And that creates a new folder with our Lightwall composition. Now if I open the comp in here, it looks a bit messy, but that's because Cinema 4D automatically exports non-existing TIFF, which is supposed to be the preview of what's rendered in it. So I'm just gonna delete the TIFF right here from the project bin. And you can see now we have all our lights in the scene just like they were in Cinema 4D. So all I need to do is select all of them from the first one to the last one. There's 80 of them total. Copy them and paste them in our main composition. So paste here. Now you can see that they're in slightly weird position right now. So let's adjust our camera to match the view properly. Or better yet, create a null and parent all these lights to it so that we can control them all together. So for that, now unfortunately this is going to be slow for a moment as long as we're displaying all these lights. Let's create a new null object, turn it into 3D, move it again to the 0, 0, 0 and parent all the lights to it. Now the reason this doesn't center properly is because I was a bit careless creating the composition in Cinema 4D. I must have not put the bend deformers perfectly centered. That basically shifted the whole thing a bit towards the left. So parent all the lights, and with them still selected, let's just turn on the shy modifier and hide them so our timeline is a bit more clean. And let's set it up. So first thing is we want to rotate it a little bit along the y-axis to match the center, and then perhaps scale them down so that we fit all of them on the screen at the same time. And this is starting to look fairly good. So if I right now view this scene from a custom view, you can see that we have our nice old style TV looking bended screen onto which we're going to project our texture map. Okay, let's jump to our default active camera view in here and start setting the whole thing up. This tutorial comes with a bunch of FFX preset files that you need to install prior to doing it. If you followed any of my previous tutorials, you already know how to install those. If not, you can consult a text file that accompanies the tutorial. Now, I have them already installed in here. So first thing I'll be doing is applying the light wall controller into our null. But before we do that, let's just make sure everything is in place. The order of layers and the naming are really important for this project. Otherwise the expressions are gonna break and you don't really want to manually have to reinitialize 80 different lights. So let's turn off the shy layers for a moment and make a check. Our null, which we need to rename into light wall controller, and this is the initial name that you have to type in. Later on you can change it once the expressions are applied. For now it needs to be there. So light wall controller has to be directly above all the lights. There shouldn't be any layers in between either the null and the lights or between the lights themselves. So we have light wall controller and then all the lights from 0 through 79, making total of 80 of them. Everything is set correctly. So with all the setup verified, we have light wall controller selected. Let's double click our preset, and that's going to apply a bunch of controls onto the layer. And let me quickly go through them. So you have light map, and that will link into our animated composition that will feed the light color and intensity to our rig. You have map blur, which functions identically to the map blur on my previous tutorial, automated light rig. And basically, if your lights tend to flicker too much or the changes are too abrupt, you just increase that number, which softens the transitions between them. And what it actually does, it increases the sample radius when we're sampling the colors to be applied to the lights. Next we have rig size, and that defines how big is our grid. And we already know that, so let's punch it in right now. We have 10 lights horizontally and 8 lights vertically. Next we have light boost, and that's gonna come in handy when we apply flares or other effects. It will allow us to adjust the entire rig's intensity, either giving it a little bit stronger light or weakening the sources, and this way we can make sure that it doesn't blow any objects out of proportion. And then we have cone angle and cone feather. Those really don't do anything in here because our lights right now are point lights, but later on when we're doing particles, we're gonna be using spotlights, and this will allow us to control emission radius and direction from the lights. We're gonna cover that in probably around 20 minutes, or maybe sooner. Let's see how fast this goes. Anyway, don't worry about this two, and the rest you should be familiar with if you did the previous tutorials. So with the light wall controller effects applied, let's shy the lights once again and create our map composition. So I'm going to What's going on here? I'm so used to working with two monitors right now. Those collapsed palettes really confuse me sometimes. Now we can, by the way, delete that Untitled 1 folder and composition. We already copied the lights into our main comp. And let's create a new one, which will be called light map. We know that our size is 10 by 8, so let's multiply it by, let's say, 20 for the size of our light map. So it's gonna be 200 by 160. Now this can be really any size, because the expressions that will apply automatically scale the proportions back. But this way our proportions are going to be similar and will be easier to manage the whole look. The length should be the same as our original projects, and so should the frame rate. Let's click OK and create something in there so we can test it very quickly. We have a light map. I'm going to create a new solid, black colored, call it background, and drop it at the bottom. I can lock it even. And this is quite important, to have that black background at the bottom. If you don't do it, you're going to have some transparency, and the effect has problems reading the color of transparency and usually results in some unexpected colorful lights flickering all over your scene. So you want to make sure that you kind of burn the background into black using a solid object. And on top of that, let's create another solid. Let's just color it into red so we can see it easily. It's something different. Let's say apply a ramp to it. So we can apply a ramp. Let's move it, the beginning to 0.0 and the end to the opposite corner, and make the colors a little bit brighter. So we can start with really bright green and go all the way to, let's say, yellow. To make it a bit more interesting, we can add some text on top. So I'm just gonna type the typical QubaHQ in here, move it to the right and animate it through. So position keyframe, click on it, and let's say within 5 seconds it should scroll entirely through. Okay, we have it scrolling, and then we can set our red solid, which is right now color ramp, to be alpha matted by this text. So this way we have colorful text scrolling through, and just to give it a bit more kick, let's keyframe the color transition. So start color is green, end color is yellow at the beginning, and at the mark of 5 seconds I'm gonna do it a little bit earlier so we can see it properly. Let's change this one to, let's say, blue, and this one to red. Maybe not the prettiest color combination, but it will do. I'm gonna hit U to uncover all the keyframes and move them through the bottom. So right now we have scrolling text that changes the colors. This looks fun. Actually, I'm not very happy with that red. Let me just change it to, let's say, something violet, maybe a little bit brighter. And we can also unroll it to see what colors it goes through. Okay, I think this looks a little bit better. So we can go back to our main comp right now and drop our light map into it. I'm just gonna put it at the bottom of everything and turn it off. We don't need to see it. It's gonna be referenced by the expressions, and that's all you need to know. Right now, let's set the lights up. So first of all, we need to let our light controller know where the light map is. So let's select the light wall controller layer, go to Effect Properties, and choose the correct light map in the light map properties. Now that's done. If you unshide the layers right now, you're going to see something happening, which is if we go just one frame forward, all the lights disappear. And that's because we didn't set the length in Cinema 4D for our composition, and it exported everything as a single frame. So let's really quickly select all the lights, go to the end of our composition, and press Alt and right square bracket to expand those lights. I have just spent around 10 minutes trying to figure out where my expression is broken, just to realize I forgot to do that. And since we have our lights selected already, let's apply our QubaHQ light wall light preset onto them. So double click on that, it takes a moment to apply, and right now we can collapse the lights again, and let's turn on the floor and see if it's working. So of course at the last frame of the animation our light map is black again, so we can't see anything, but if we come to somewhere in the middle, there we go, we can see the lights affecting our floor. I'm going to press Ctrl-Shift-H to hide the helper items, so this way we don't have to look at all the light icons. It will also speed up the screen refresh a little bit. And yeah, this looks beautiful. We can preview it and we can see that the invisible lights are scrolling somewhere and affecting the floor, but we can't see the lights themselves, of course. So to do that, we need to create a Flares layer, and I'm going to use Video Copilot's Optical Flares, but you can really use any Flare plugin or develop your own system of visualizing lights for it. So let's create a new solid, call it Flares, click OK, put it on top of everything and apply the Flare plugin. So Effects, Video Copilot, Optical Flares. And by default, of course, it doesn't do much because it's in its standard 2D source type format. So let's switch it to track lights. And as soon as we do that, we start seeing some craziness happening. This doesn't look too pretty, so let's adjust the optical flares very quickly. If I remember correctly, since it's been almost 2 months since the last tutorial, I was using Natural Flares Blue Steel preset for this stuff with most of the properties switched off. So I'm just gonna solo the glow, solo the shimmer, let's see other properties. Multi-iris we don't need, sparkle, streak, what else do we have in here? Hoop is nice, and I think that's it. That creates the flare that we're going to be using. So click OK. And of course right now this is going to take a while to render. We're slowing down considerably, but we can see that it's working. Now those flares are huge right now. They're absolutely gargantuous, and it wouldn't do us any good to have the composition that just blows bright light at you. But before we start adjusting optical flares, let's make sure that our floor looks correct. So I'm going to switch the flares off for a moment and look at the floor. Now we can see that right now the floor is really bright and it's not gonna look very good. Let's go to Light Wall Controller and lower the light boost property. So if I remember correctly, -5 should do the trick. This is starting to look better. What we can also do is unroll the opacity for the floor and lower it to, let's say, 50. Okay, this is pretty nice. This gives us a feeling of some lights being above it, but it's not too strong and doesn't bother us too much. If we turn on the flares right now, we'll see that they are much weaker, and of course they're hiding everything because the mode is still set to normal. So let's switch it to add, and there we go. We have our lens flares, and this is BA from the Kuba text. And if we scroll it back, we can see that the text is moving through. I'm gonna pause the video and run a quick preview just to see how does it look when it's animated. Once it's rendered, I'm gonna resume the recording. Okay, so this is how it looks right now, and it flickers like crazy and doesn't look very good. That's because our sample radius right now is at 1 by 1 pixel, and that means it samples the single pixel from our light map composition, and the changes become very abrupt and generally create not a very good looking result. So let's tweak our light wall controller settings to get something that looks a bit smoother and creates a pleasant scrolling effect. That should be sufficient to take the map blur and increase it to, let's say, 10. And you will see that it will create a sort of anti-aliasing effect in here. And if we preview it right now, the flicker should be gone and the whole scrolling should be much better to look at. Yep, so here we are with the radius set to 10. The flicker is gone mostly, and the whole thing looks much more natural. We can continue increasing the sample radius or blur map, whatever I call this property. Let me just check at it. Map blur. We can increase it to even 15. That's gonna make the whole transition even a bit softer. But you can see that right now our lights dimmed down quite a bit. If I increase the light boost, that's gonna again start brightening our floor too much. So instead of that, I'm just going to go to our Fleurs properties and increase the brightness in here to, let's say, 150, and that should do the trick. No, 150 is too less, let's do 200. Yep, and right now we're starting to get a pretty nice result. So this is pretty much how this thing works. You create a bunch of lights, link them up using the presets, and your animation is ready to go. In a moment I'm going to show you how to drive particles with this thing. So if you're not interested in expressions, you can skip several minutes ahead. But for those of you who want to know how the engine of these expressions work, here's some technical information. So the expressions on light wall controller are pretty much just a set of sliders. They don't leak anywhere except for the light map, which naturally links to the light map, but the rest basically allows you to punch in the values. Where the real work of this engine is being done is inside the lights themselves, and if I expand it, you can see that we have fairly complex expressions running in here. It's probably pretty difficult to see them from the capture window of After Effects, so let me open the text file and we can have a look at what's happening. So first of all, I'm going to open the light control expression, which goes onto color, and maybe I can just increase the font size a little bit so it's easier to view. 14, maybe 16. Yeah, that's good enough. So I try to keep it as simple as possible, but since I'm not a programmer, it still probably looks quite confusing. Let's get through it. First of all, the first line will define where is the controller. So that allows our light, where it is. That allows our light to hook up to proper light wall controller. And also this way we define the name controller to be linked to that layer, and we don't have to retype this whole long part of it in every other line of code. Second thing is we teach the expression what's our image map. So it basically from the controller layer it reads the effect light map and figures out where we'll be sampling for. Next thing is the sample size. Basically it takes the sample size. Let me go back in here so we can see our controls properly. So in here it's called map blur, on the other thing it's called sample size, but it's the same thing. It basically reads our value and runs it through linear to make sure that we don't go below 0 or above 1000, and transfers into sample size. Light index figures out how far in our timeline our light is from the light controller, and this is why we shouldn't insert any other layers in between. So basically it knows if it's a first, second, third or 80th light after the controller. Next we read the rig size, which is in this case 10 by 8, and the map size, which learns how big in pixels our composition for the light map is. Cell size figures out where to position our sampler. So it basically divides the size of our light map by the size of our rig and creates separate cells. And then origin figures out where does the first spot, the first sampler go. Then we have a bunch of math which is actually not formatted very well, but this allows the sampler to go one by one through the lights, and at the end of each row jump to the next row and continue through different lights. That sounded very confusing. Once we figured those positions, it turns it into sample point and then samples the color. Yeah, that's it. I think I'm pretty good at explaining how to do stuff in After Effects, but not in expressions. But if you put your mind to it, I think it's not that difficult to understand. And if you don't want to understand it, you can just double click and apply it and get on with your life. Somebody already did that work for you. We have a second expression as well, which is light wall intensity. Let me open that one. And this one is pretty much identical to the previous, with the only difference that in the end we don't just sample a color, but assign that color to the value called RGB and then transform it into hue, saturation, lightness, and then read the lightness and multiply it by light boost for adjusting how bright our lights are. Don't save. Well, that's how the expression works. If you have any questions, just post a comment. I will try to answer to the best of my abilities. Alright, so we have a first part of our demo in here already done. I still think those lights are a bit too weak. Let me just increase the flares brightness into, let's say, 300. Let's make it shine a bit nicer. Yeah, let's make it feel like a concert hall or so. And now we're gonna do some particles. So again, for the particle rig, you could either create it in After Effects by copy-pasting a bunch of lights. If you're inclined to do so, you're welcome, but I'm just going to jump to Cinema 4D and create a rig in there since it's much faster and easier. I have a new file in here, so I have to set the things up yet again. So film, video, PAL, widescreen, square pixel, and we repeat pretty much the same process. Now, keep in mind, you don't have to work with planes. I'm using planes for this particular project, but you can create your emitters from whatever you want. So you can build your light rig based on a sphere, on a cube, on the oil tank, on a human model, whatever you really want. I'm using plane because it's simple, quick, and sufficient for this tutorial. So our new plane is going to be 800 meters wide and 40 meters tall, and is going to have 20 divisions in the width and only one segment in the height. And again, that creates perfect square cells for us. Again, let's put a bend deformer, put it inside of the plane, set it to, let's say, 30 degrees and align it properly. So we need to shift it by 90 degrees along the x-axis. Whoops, I think I did 95. And then 90 degrees here, and so that we don't have the alignment problems, let's just select the top view and make sure that it starts the bend at the origin point properly. Then let's switch the mode to unlimited, and that created a pretty nice curve. I think, yeah, I'm happy with it. Let's just zoom in on it. Next we create a light, and this time I'm going to use a spotlight. There is a good reason for that. You may be inclined to use a point light or omni light, whichever naming convention you prefer, but the spotlights will allow us to control direction in which the particles are emitted, as well as their spread, because just like the light comes out of this cone, the particles will travel only within this space, and that lets us control them very easily. Now we need to scale it down a little bit, because otherwise we're gonna get huge lights in After Effects, and that's not going to look very well or very good. And with the light created, we go to MoGraph, cloner object, drop the light inside of the cloner object, switch the mode into object, and drop the plane in the object tab. Then that creates our lights. Again, they are created on each of the vertices of the geometry. We're gonna switch the mode from vertex into polygon center. And that's a nice array. Now, very important thing in here. If you want to use your lights as emitters for the particular plugin, they cannot be named light. Particular will not recognize that, so we need to rename it into emitter. Whoops, and the case should be correct. So I renamed that into emitter, and right now I can click the magic button, which right now I learned the proper name for. This button is called Make Object Editable, and it could be substituted by hitting the letter C. Anyway, we press it and presto, we have all our emitters. Let's just make sure that the first one is on the left, the last one is on the right, so the order is correct. And we can now delete our plane, we don't need it anymore, and export this file to After Effects. So again, we go to our render settings, go to Save tab. I have to yet again create a new name for it, so pata 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 pata. That one didn't really matter. Expand compositing project file, save After Effects, include 3D data, save project file. And I already created it once and I forgot to change the name to emitter, so I'm right now recording this segment for the second time. So this is gonna be replacing my particle wall AEC file. Save. Yes, I do want to replace it, and we're done with Cinema 4D. Okay, we want our particle simulation to start at the 5-second mark, And I want to make sure that all the other stuff that we're not going to be using in there ends before that, so that all the lights don't start fighting for supremacy over our composition, etc. So let's expand it. Okay. Since I'm re-recording this segment, I already did it. So I truncated all my lights to 1 frame before the 5-second frame. So right after that they disappear. So this is done already. I can hide them again. I'm gonna take my flares and light wall controller, go to edit split layer. So this way we have new instances for them that will control our new rig. And we can also move our preview area, not to bother with the previous start that's already finished. And one thing to keep in mind, right now we have this light wall controller 2. That's a different name than our initial expression. And if I apply the expression automatically by just double clicking in my effects and presets, all the new lights are gonna reference the light wall controller that controls our scrolling text, and that's not going to produce very good results. It would rather produce errors or nothing at all. So I'll have to do a little bit of manual adjustment, which I'll guide you through just to make sure everything works fine. So let's import our particle wall, and that again creates a new untitled composition with this beautiful name I typed in, which I can delete immediately. Let's open the composition. You can see already that again we have only 1 frame length of the lights. We'll have to adjust that as well. Let's copy them, go to our main composition and paste them. Move them to start at 5-second mark. You can't see them right now, but if I zoom in, they are there. Go to the end of composition, Alt, right square bracket to expand them. And everything of course becomes super bright, because all these lights are not yet linked anywhere and the flares are going crazy. Let's select the first light of this group and apply our light wall light expression to it. And the result is not very amusing because we need to adjust the settings. So let's expand it right now, go into light options, unroll the intensity expression, and in the first line, which defines the controller, we're going to simply set it into light wall controller 2. And we need to do it for all the expressions in there. So the same thing in color, light wall controller, whoops, controller 2. And also, since we're using spotlights, we have the same thing in cone angle and cone feather. So light wall controller 2, and this guy as well, light wall controller space 2. Alright, so we have this thing done, and we could either copy paste this or do something much simpler. I'm gonna select all these 4 properties that right now define our light, go to effects and presets, click on new and save it as a TMP or temp FFX file. And I did it before, so I already have it there. And that's basically going to create a temporary new preset that I can right now apply on the other effects. So let's just select all the remaining lights from 1 to 19, navigate to our temp and double click that. As you can see, I do it quite frequently, so I have a bunch of temporary files in there I always forget to clean up. And this is gone, and the screen has gone black. That's because our light map doesn't have any information, any color information at that point. So let's create something for it. Before we do so, actually, we can also select our lights and shy them away as well. So this way we have, again, a manageable timeline. Let's go to light wall controller, make sure that it's still linked to the proper light map. Yes, it is. We can open our light map. I've been using CS5 for a while, so I'm always forgetting to hold Alt when double clicking. We go to our 5-second mark, and just like we did before, let's truncate the animation of the QubaHQ, and at 5-second mark let's create a new one. Actually, I can reuse this color ramp just by duplicating it and moving it to 5-second mark, and then create a new matte for it. So I'm just gonna make a new solid, let's say 30 pixels wide, maybe 40 could be better. And turn it off. This already had the alpha matting on, so it automatically reads the black solid as the matte for this layer. And let's just make it pass through the screen. So keyframe it on the right side, go 1, 2, 3, 30 frames ahead, move it to the left, maybe do it twice. So toggle hold keyframe, move 1 keyframe ahead, copy paste the keyframes. This way we have 1, 2 passes, maybe 1 more pass, and then we can do the reverse ones just like in the demo. So I'm gonna duplicate these guys, truncate them earlier, and reverse the animation on the black solid. So in the beginning I'm gonna move it to the right, and in the end, sorry, in the beginning to the left, in the end to the right. So we basically have it pass once, twice, and then 2 of them at the same time. That's gonna create that Las Vegas style fountain effect. Alright, let's see if everything is working fine. This looks promising, but the lights disappear after a moment. And that's because we didn't adjust our light wall controller for the new size of our composition. So you can see that right now the rig size is still 10 by 8. This one should be 20 by 1. And if we preview this right now, it should create a proper look. Okay, unfortunately it's way too slow, or I'm messing something up. Let me pause for a second and figure it out. Yeah, okay, I figured out what the problem is. My light wall controller is currently underneath the lights. And as I said, the ordering is very important because the lights are gonna read the distance from that layer. So as soon as I move it above, we're getting the proper results. And the lights are going from right to left, just like on our animation, and then we have this double light effect in the end. If I press Ctrl-Shift-H right now, I can see that all my lights are in fact pointing upwards with their cones adjusted correctly, and this will let me emit particles going up from it. Before I do so, I can also adjust the cone angle, because right now it's at 10 degrees, which is a bit low. Let's change it to 35. Have a look. Yes, this is much wider right now. And I can also increase the feather of the cone to, let's say, 10, so the particles won't be coming out of such a sharp triangular area, but have a bit more randomness to them. Alright, I can hide this stuff right now. I'm happy with the way the flares look, so let's set up the particles. Now, when I was creating a demo for this project, it took me a while to set up the particles to look the way I wanted them to. So, not to bore you with constant back and forth on the settings of particular, again, I created some FFX presets that we can just very quickly apply. All you need to do is basically create a new solid, call it smoke, drop it underneath the flares, go into the presets that were supplied with this project and just double click QubaHQ light wall smoke. And that should create a nice particular smoke. There it is, emitting from the particles. I'm gonna explain how it's done in a moment. We're just gonna go through the settings I adjusted. Right now you can see some weird blue smoke in here. That's because our layer starts too early, so we have to go back to the 5-second mark and make sure that it will begin together with the lights. And now if we look at it, we have the smoke coming out. We can right now duplicate this layer, move it above the flares, delete the effect from it, rename the layer into sparks, and apply the sparks preset, QubaHQ light wall sparks. Double click and that will drop in particular with the sparks effect on it. And I'm gonna switch this one into add mode so that it looks a little bit sharper. Now I think my original composition also had the camera move, so why don't we do this right now? I think the initial position of the camera is fairly good. Now you can see how slow this whole thing becomes. Let's just hit home button. So we can keyframe just the position of the camera. I don't want to change where it looks. Go to, let's say, 10-second mark. I think at 10 seconds everything should be gone already. Yep. Actually, we should go a bit earlier so we can see where we're moving, and just move it back quite a bit. And again, this is ridiculously slow, but this position looks fairly fine. So I'm just gonna move this keyframe to 10 seconds or attempt to. Come on, you can do it, After Effects. It's not that hard. Alright, so we have our camera move incorporated right now. You may see that in the first part of the composition our floor lights up really nice, and in the second part it does not. And that's because we're using all the spotlights which are pointing upwards. So our floor receives no light whatsoever. You can also see that we have some nasty repetition happening in here, and I'm gonna explain it in a moment. But first let's do something with that floor. Honestly speaking, I couldn't really figure out a way to do it elegantly, so I'm just gonna put 2 extra lights on top of the scene and they're gonna illuminate the floor. So let's create a new light, not a new null, a new light. This time set it to point, and I think on one side it could be green colored. Let's get it in. This is bright, this is very bright. We're gonna remedy that in just a moment. Maybe I can move a bit ahead to get rid of all the other stuff. Okay. Okay, I'm just gonna hit caps lock to disable refreshing of the screen, and that's gonna let me operate much faster in here. So what I need to do is I want one of my lights to be directly above this light and another one directly above this one. So what I'm gonna do is basically get the position of this one, get the position of our new one, copy the values. So this is minus 430, 0 and minus, let's say, 180. And then I just need to move it up. We can preview this perhaps. Let's just see. Release the caps lock. Okay, the position looks fine. I enabled the caps lock again. And if I remember correctly, let's just reference our light map for a second. The left side should be yellow in the beginning. Where is the light map? Right here. This is our ramp. No, the left side is green in the beginning. I can just copy this color properties from here and paste them in our lights color. I could also link them, but I'm lazy. So we have our light changing the color just like our ramp in there. And let's do the same thing for the opposite light. So I'm gonna copy the end color lights, duplicate light 80, move it to the right side, and since I know this is perfectly mirrored, I just need to change minus 430 into 430, which will position it on the right side. Unscroll the colors and whoops, select it and then paste it. So right now my lights change the color correctly. And one more thing before I resume rendering, which I know has to be done, I will go to my Fleurs properties, or actually I can even let you see it rendering. And right now our flares are rendering every single light, which I don't know, looks kinda cool but not really what I want. So I'm gonna go to Flares, unroll the effects, and make sure that the lights, where do we have the properties? Positioning mode, track lights, track light options. It will only use the lights that begin with the letter E. So all the emitter lights are gonna create flares, and those two will not be visible through the lens flares and will only be used to illuminate the floor. There we go. So right now we get a little bit of the floor. We can see the space, and our little lights in here, the particle ones, are generating the flares properly. Okay, that took a while. Now, two things. First of all, let's hide the helpers again. You can see there is some nasty repetition happening, and unfortunately I wasn't able to find a way around it. Basically, when you use particular with the lights, it will create exactly the same emission scenarios for each light. each producer will emit particles in exactly the same way, so the particles coming out from this light and that light will be spread exactly identically, creating this nasty horizontal repetition. I tried to remedy it in a smoke using a turbulence field, but I couldn't do the same thing with the sparks because the sparks are bouncing off the floor, and that's why it's visible. The whole thing happens quite fast though, and it shouldn't be noticeable. Another thing is that I most likely need to adjust the bounce properties for the sparks because the preset references the floor layer, which was different in my original composition. So let's just unroll particular, go to physics. Physics model is bounce. Yes, and we need to define the floor layer. So that's our floor. And that should create some bouncing animation in there. Yeah, and we can see right now the particles are much more condensed around this area and not so much above it. Let's also make sure that our new emitter is properly high. Right now it's not. It's at 0 point. I forgot to move them a little bit up. So let's select all the emitters, turn off the keyframes. We don't really not need them. And just move them up a little bit. Perhaps by 30 pixels or so. And this way we will avoid particles unnecessarily clipping through and flying through the floor. Alright, so basically everything is done right now. We have the animation that looks identical to what I shown you on the demo, or at least very close. Let me just trim the composition here. If you're interested, let me just quickly walk you through how the particles were set up in case you want to actually learn something rather than just apply my presets. So let's check the smoke first. So emitter type is set to lights. So it's going to read all the active lights with the name beginning with the word emitter and emit particles from there. Direction is set to directional, and when you do that, the direction of the particles is going to obey the cone of light. Now to illustrate that, let me just modify the cone a little bit. So if I go to Lightwall controller, just look what happens to the streaks. Right now they're pretty puffy and round. If I go to my cone angle and change it to just 1 degree, it doesn't look like anything different happened. Let's change this to 0 as well. Alright, I tried to illustrate my point, but it doesn't really do anything. Basically, you can control where the particles go with this too. Maybe if I change it to 360, it should create a bit more puffy. Yes. Okay, so when you set it to 360, basically the particles fly every which way. Act more like this was a point light or omni light. But at 35, with a little bit of feathering, they are going relatively upwards, like I intend them to. Our emitter size is 50 by 50 by 50, and that makes sure that the particles don't all originate from a single point, but are spread out a little bit. Velocity is pretty high. It's at 600, with some randomness on top of it. But that's immediately countered by the physics air resistance, which is set at 1.5. So basically the particles start out really quickly, but then get dampened by the air properties and don't just shoot off the screen. The particle type I'm using, as you can guess, is the Cloudlet with full feathering, short lifespan and relatively high size of 25. And I'm also using the Shadowlet for main particles, which creates a bit more of three-dimensionality. If I switch it off right now, you will see that the whole thing looks more flat. If I turn it on, it starts looking more like a realistic cloud. On top of that, I have the turbulence field, which I mentioned earlier, with a very sharp, very quick fade-in curve and affect position set to 150 pixels. I think that's pretty much it for the smoke. It's nothing really special. Anybody can set it up, and as I said, if you don't feel like setting it up, just copy my preset. The secondary particles, sparks, behave the same way in terms of emission, so they use the light emitter, but this time we're using uniform direction. So if I change it to directional, you'll see them all shooting upwards from the lights with uniform. They will basically fly at any direction they feel. The only difference in here is that the physics is not the air type, but instead of it's using bounce with the floor layer defined as the bouncing plane. To create a kind of streaky feel to them, I also forced fed it with the motion blur rendering. Motion blur is set to on with a shutter angle of 180 and the opacity boost of 20. Now, if I turn off this opacity boost, the particles are gonna feel really weak. So that's why I'm using it, to make them feel more like lines rather than dots. And if I lower shutter angle, we'll just see spheres. Well, it's a matter of choice. And you can basically decide how long you want your particles to be. You can go up to 3600, which creates really long streaks. I found 180 to be just fine enough to make them not look like spheres, but to create a little bit of a kind of sparky effect. So I think we're nearly finished. The only thing left here in order to make it look exactly like the demo scene would be to duplicate the floor, import the grungy texture that's a staple of this series of tutorials, and I have it right here. Import it as footage and just replace the floor with it. And it's gonna look really weird first because the floor was scaled really high. So let's lower the scale back to 100. And where did it go? It's not really visible much. Let's increase the opacity to 100 and switch both the floor and the grunge transfer mode into add. And also move it back to the center of the composition. You may remember that we moved the floor by 10,000 pixels to the back. So let's bring it back to the 0 origin point. Still huge. Okay, that was 1000, not 100. Let's try this. Okay, so that gives us a nice flooring. Maybe we can scale it down a bit further and rotate it a little bit so that it's a bit less predictable, maybe by 30 degrees. That's looking fine. And I can change the transparency back to 50, and I think I had 2 copies of that in the original one, so the other one I can rotate by some other angle, let's say 130, and scale it up this time to, let's say, 110. Those are really non-important arbitrary numbers, but this way we have some floor that we can identify as a physical layer, and additionally we can create the reflections. So there is no need to create any rig for it. I'm just gonna use the simple method that I explained in my reflections tutorial. I'm gonna duplicate the main composition, rename it into reflections, open it up, turn off the floor and the grunge layers. We already have them in the main comp, so we don't have to render them twice. Create a new null object, 3D one, put it at the bottom of the stack so it does not affect any of the particle simulations. We can rename it into Reflector. Make sure that it's positioned at the origin point, so again we zero all the values, and parent the camera to it. Parent it to the layer, not to the position. And non-uniformly scale it along the y-axis. So from 100 we make -100, and this way we created the reflections. I think we can adjust our flares to be a bit less prominent in here. So let's just go to options of optical flares and turn off everything but the glow on them. We still have one more element, yes. This is okay, and we need to do the same thing for the other flares. So options, turning off all the extra elements. There we go. And then go back to main and drop our newly created reflections composition below everything else, and probably adjust the transparency so that it's not quite so strong. Transparency to, let's say, 35%. Yep, and that does it. We have our Kuba. You know what? 50% would be better. Alright, so that does it. We have our scrolling text animating through the wall of lights, which takes the first 5 seconds of our composition. And as you can see, not only we're scrolling the text, but we're also changing the light colors as the text scrolls. Now we could probably tweak the brightness to make sure everything is uniform, but I leave it up to you. And after the 5-second mark, we have our lights emitting smoke and sparkles together with the flares. Everything beautifully reflecting in our shiny scratched floor. That takes forever to render. Okay, I'm gonna pause the video right now and just render the whole thing so we can have a look at it while I say goodbye to you. So here it is. The animation is finished, the preview is rendered, and as usual I feel a bit awkward when I come to this point of the tutorial, when all the instruction is over and there's not really much else to be said. But I guess we created what we set out to do. We built a wall of lights and animated it using a texture map. We used the same texture map to drive a cool particle effect. And just keep in mind, you don't have to limit yourself to whatever you've seen in this tutorial. If you have a machine that can handle it, go ahead, create a wall that's 100 lights wide and 100 lights tall. I know the expressions can handle it. I don't know how about After Effects. I guess that remains to be seen. If you attempt something like this, be sure to let me know in the comments. Same thing with the particles. Don't feel like you have to emit smoke and sparkles from them. The effect can be used to drive any kind of particle effect, and it's really versatile. I did a little modification to the timeline while rendering this preview. If you remember these 2 lights that I used to illuminate the floor during the smoke scene, I added a fade in and fade out keyframes to them. Nothing really that I need to show you how to do. A simple intensity animation from 0 to 100 and back to 0. And I have no idea when I'll find time to record the next tutorial, and I know everybody's waiting for that one, the pixel perfect procedural layer disintegration. Let's hope that's not too far from now. But until then, for QubaHQ, I'm Kuba Michalski, and I'll see you next time. Meanwhile, it's about time. StarCraft 2, here I come.